Good evening and afternoon and morning to whoever's watching us live, and the same goes for anyone listening to or watching this retrospectively. I'm live from the Hotel Gotham, which does feel like it could be in the series Gotham or Batman episode in Manchester tonight. So hopefully the internet survives. If not, you'll get to see Simon turn up in his dressing gown and slippers. With or without a pipe, who knows? I feel the latter would be more entertaining. My guest tonight is a fascinating lady, Megan Epperson, who leads and runs security as the CISO of Axonius. We've got all kinds of things to talk about, so rather than me babbling about nothing, let's go straight to it, and we'll bring her on, please, Simon. Megan, hi, how are you? And thank you for joining me.
Hi, doing well. Thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I feel like just from our preamble of like a few minutes before this started, I feel like I have 1,000 new questions I want to ask, but we'll see where it goes. We'll start in the traditional way. Our form of this podcast goes pretty simply. We have a get to know you, a little bit about your career. We talk about a couple of cyber news stories, and then we get into something interesting. Today, I'm hoping to talk about military to cyber, gender diversity, neurodiversity, challenges of being a woman and a mum in the workplace, and everything else in between. So we are going on a roller coaster. But firstly, the questions I always ask everyone are a bit about your intro and background, and then your hero. It can be anybody. Everyone knows mine is Alexander Hamilton, who I give all the time. Your hobby and the biggest risk you've ever taken. Take it away.
Oh, wow. That's a good start. Okay, so my hero is not as fascinating as yours. My hero, like, you may laugh at this, it's seriously, it's Iron Man. Okay, look, I love Marvel videos, and look, I strive to be as successful as him one day. Like, if I had as much money as that fictional character and could help that many people in the world, like, sign me up. Yes, that would be awesome.
Wait, just before you carry on, is it Iron Man or is it Robbie Downey Jr.? Because I think they're kind of intertwined as a thing.
I mean, can't both be true? I mean, they're one thing, right? Like,
okay, fine. Hero, hobby and biggest risk you ever took.
oh my gosh. So, okay. So I have no hobbies. My hobbies are work. I love to work. And that's I don't know. That's my hobby. I read a lot of regulations. I'm super boring in that area. I used to have more hobbies when I was younger. Now I'm older and have no hobbies. So my biggest risk, oh my gosh, there's so many depending on the day. I mean, I feel like that's a calculated decision every day. I can't even think of that one. I guess my biggest risk while in the military was going on a convoy without proper convoy operations in place. That was really stupid. And then in the civilian side, I guess just being innovative and trying new things, knowing that they may fail, but adapting and adjusting.
Okay, you've given me a good starting point. So you can't be seen on camera, but for the benefit, and there is no offense intended, Megan is a petite lady. And when I heard when you first met you and you talked about your military career and the things you've been through, and then going to cyber, all of it took me a bit by surprise, which is why I said I think we should talk to you. I think this will be fascinating. So talk me through your background, how you went from college or school straight into the military, where you've been, what you've done, how you ended up at a desk doing cybersecurity. I'm curious beyond belief.
Oh, it's a super fascinating story. I guess more for others than me because I lived it. It was actually a very painful story. But I wanted to go to college, and the only way to be able to afford to go to college was to join the military. That was literally my only option. So I leveraged that. Everyone told me I was going to fail and not be successful. So I was very determined. I have a lot of inner grit. I was going to be successful. There was no failure option for me. So I did. I went to basic and AIT. I was 74 Delta to start, which is chemical operations specialist. I thought I liked dealing with a lot of chemicals and hanging out in the gas chamber. Turns out that's a lie. I don't recommend it for anyone. And then I ended up getting a lot of mentoring earlier in my career. And someone was like, hey, why don't you have a lot of leadership capabilities? Why don't you consider going to OCS, which is Officer Candidate School? I was like, all right, sounds fun. Mostly because it was suggested to me and I had nothing else better to do.
Okay.
So I ended up going to OCS at Fort Benning, which ended up going really well. I ended up getting commissioned in the military, which worked out better for me because I realized at that point in my life, like I have authority issues. So being an enlisted soldier was very difficult for me, and then transitioning over to being an officer was actually equally as hard because it turns out everyone in the Army has authority issues. No one listens.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Fine.
yeah, so suddenly I was in charge of 35, 40 different individuals, and no one cared who I was. They didn't care if you were commissioned. They didn't care if you were an officer. So it was very interesting because everyone aged. It was between 18 and 52 years old. So I'm trying to lead
Wow.
a group of individuals, very, very, spread out in age, different backgrounds
Yeah.
and understanding. And here I am coming in at 22, having no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah. And so when you talked about being on a convoy that wasn't properly supported, so where have you been with your military career, and where was I'm guessing that might have been the scariest time you had, but tell me about some of the experiences you had.
Yeah. So I've been to a lot of stateside areas, which is great. I've been to Texas, Washington State, all over the Southeast. I have not had the opportunity to visit Fort Drum. I never wanted to go there anyways. But overseas, I've gone to Iraq. Iraq, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan. I visited Germany for a minute. That was a fun 30-day vacation. Got to go to Heidelberg. That was probably the best part of my
Okay.
deployment in the military. And a reason why I joined the military. I thought joining the Army, I was going to get to go to, I don't know, Japan, Italy. Boy, was I wrong. I did not go anywhere like that.
I
No,
feel like you probably didn't join at the right time for those kinds of
I,
trips.
I didn't join the right time and I joined the wrong branch. So
Yeah. Okay.
definitely that's more of like an Air Force and Navy. I ended
Yeah.
up joining the Army. So that was probably my mistake.
Yeah. So where were you convoyed, and why wasn't it secured? You said that was one of the biggest risks you ever took. I'm curious about this experience.
Yeah, I would think so. So when in country, you do a lot of like convoy operations, going for
Yeah.
different FOBs, remote locations,
Yeah.
and also doing a lot of command and control of different convoys. So when my unit was over there, we were part of a larger logistic unit.
Where's over
Um,
there? Sorry. Where
Oh,
was
sorry,
this?
Afghanistan. So I
Afghanistan.
was in
Okay.
Afghanistan. We were part of a larger logistic unit. We were
Yeah.
partnered with NATO, had a lot of, international soldiers and even contractors attached to our unit. So we were responsible for ensuring, downward FOBs, the forward operating bases and
Yeah.
remote areas within Afghanistan had the appropriate amount of ammo, food,
Yeah.
supplies, whatever they need, water, because you would be surprised how quickly water just goes bad in
That's
Afghanistan.
interesting. I didn't know that was a thing. Okay.
Yeah. So it's so hot there in some areas of Afghanistan that the plastic, we deliver crates. They would deliver crates of water bottles, and the plastic would start to deteriorate and break down and be unsafe to drink.
What's that? I did
But
not know this. This is interesting.
yeah,
I've learned something new. I like to learn things. I've learned something new. Okay. And so your responsibility there was primarily making sure that resources were available as the camps got closer and closer to points of conflict, effectively.
yes, and also kind of making sure we had secure communications to those locations as well, and
Yeah.
coordinating kind of troop movement. That was a big one. So troop movement was always a little bit of a scary area because you're basing the troop movement plan based on the intel you get, and the intel you get was always about 12 hours behind current intel. So there was always the
Mm.
risk that things could go sideways. So that effective planning and risk mitigation was really, really important. And that's how I ended up taking a natural kind of step from the military into more of risk management and GRC. It was just a natural fit.
I'm going to come forward to that. I'm going back one step. So I've spoken to a lot of soldiers in my time, and I've asked this question a lot and got very different responses. Were you ever scared?
Yes, like of course. Yeah. So I remember one time we were overseas and we ended up taking on kind of small arm fire. That was pretty terrifying, completely unexpected. Not to mention
Wait, you were
that
shot at? Actually, like literally shot at?
well, the location of which I was at was shot
Yeah.
at. So but I was more inwards.
Yeah.
But that was pretty intense. And then the other things you cannot account for are the random mortars that come through. all hours of the day and night. So they would just kind of, propel those things over and land in your location. A kind of a tent area about 2 down from me was actually hit by that, which was really terrifying because the shrapnel goes everywhere as well.
Yeah, wow.
Thankfully, everyone kind of survived. They were med backed out, taken care of. But the biggest risk there, I think, is not the direct impact. Well, obviously that is a risk, but there's no way you know where it's going to land. But it's the shrapnel that comes out of those that disperse so intensely, and they go depending in every direction. There's no way to know. But it's like TSA, right? So when you go through a security checkpoint, go to TSA, it's like this false sense of security, at least in my opinion. We had these bunkers overseas too, just made of concrete barriers, right? And they're like, hey, if the mortar alarm goes off, go to these bunkers, you'll be safe. And I'm like, me thinking risk always. I'm like, are you serious? If a mortar were to hit that, the concrete would literally crush us. No, I don't think it's the safest place to go.
Yeah, I can get. Yeah, anytime anyone tells me a structure was built to withstand bombs, I always get slightly nervous. I'm like, how did you test
How do
that
you know,
thesis?
right?
Like,
Who is certifying this? Like, I get like the people who certify elevators every like 6 months, whatever that is. I get that, but how do you make sure that this building's going to withstand that? Like,
exactly. So, why did you leave the army, and how did you end up in cyber? Intentional. You said it was natural, but intentional choice, accidental. Like, how did you go from there to here?
yeah, so I ended up leaving the military because the deployments got a little bit more intense, and I had had a
Define
daughter at
intense.
the time, so they became more frequent.
Okay.
So and I didn't have the capacity to be able to fully take care of my daughter at the time, and my spouse was also in the military, so he was deploying too. So it became really difficult to navigate where she was going and who was taking care of her during these deployments. So it just kind of came to a natural. I did exactly 12 years. I always ran down to 10. It's a natural progression timeout. And then I got what I wanted out of the military, which was for them to pay for my college. That was really why I joined. Also to learn some leadership skills, which, I think I learned more of those in my civilian time than in the military.
Fair.
But because basically in the military, you're told what to do. You don't
Yeah.
get to question it a lot. And when you get question it, you get extra duty time or get to clean the latrines more or whatever that is. But in the civilian world, it's more open. They're like, yes, I'm glad you asked that question. Let me explain to you why. It's a little bit more easier to learn leadership skills.
Do you think that's better? Do you think I sometimes wonder myself, like, is there a medium? I feel like the military style is obviously quite dictatorial, but I feel like we're almost very democratic in leadership these days, and maybe we've gone too far the opposite direction at times. Like, what do you think?
Yes. So my transition out of the military was very, very difficult because I took that leadership I learned from the military, and I had these very, very high expectations of individuals reporting to me. And I would do very immediate on the spot corrections, just like I was corrected in the military. I'm like, hey, you messed up here. Don't do this or bad things will happen. I took that same kind of leadership style into my civilian career as well. I had a lot of great mentors along the way pull me aside and said, hey, I get why you lead that way, but it's okay. No one's going to get hurt here. Like, I was like, I don't know. Somebody may get hurt if they miss this deadline, but no. But I've learned to soften my leadership style in the civilian kind of world, but also maintain that high level in integrity and accountability that I learned from the military too. So it's a good combination.
And then in terms of landing security, this is just what you looked for straight out of college. This is what your education was, and then what you decided to do professionally after you left the military?
Yeah, kind of. So when I was enlisted, I was a 74 Delta, which basically dealt with like chemical warfare, things like that.
Yep.
And then when I went to OCS, I rebranched into Signal. I scored high enough on my ASVAB to be able to go into kind of this Signal branch, which was really great because for Signal, I could pick where I wanted to be stationed. I had my first 3 top choices of duty station. My second choice, if it wasn't Signal, it was going to be Intel. So I was going to work in military intelligence. Thankfully, I picked up for Signal. I learned a lot about satellite communications, basic, how to build a computer, basic networking, the difference between NIPR and SIPR nets, really focus in on HughesNet, the satellite communications we use kind of overseas, and line of sight telecommunications as well. So it was a lot of fun to just learn that. And I gravitated towards learning all of that. And then my first civilian job, it was a natural fit. I went from the military into more of a business continuity kind of area for a financial service institution, which brought in a lot of that what if scenario planning that I've always had naturally in the back of my mind. And then from there, I progressed on to kind of running a DR program at another financial service institution. Then I went into consulting, the most challenging part of my civilian time, because that, like, you have no one to help you then. You're like on your own.
Yep.
After that, I got picked up and worked at a startup organization, and eventually went on to work for a company that was bought out by S&P. So I got to work at S&P for a little bit. And then I ended up at Axonius. So it was really a really cool transition of how I went from military to financial services, to consulting, to a startup, back into a financial service, and now back to a startup.
It's a cool journey. You also got a shout out in the chat from someone else who's served military duty.
Awesome.
Which I think is cool. Anyone has any more questions or comments, then please feel free to drop as we want and we'll discuss them. Let's pivot a little bit. I like to go into the news and I want to make sure I have time to ask you 1,000 questions, but I'm going to pick 2 stories that I saw this week that I thought were interesting. One is a lawsuit surrounding the suicide of a teenager where the mother is pressing charges based on AI being the reason for the suicide. Now, I know this is a bit of an awkward conversation generally, but like, where do you sit on that as a leader, as a technologist, as a person, as a mom? Like, do we give AI too much credit? Do we fear it not enough? Technology full stop, maybe social media, maybe it's a wider, broader conversation, but do you think that technological companies should be brought to trial for these kind of things?
So I'm not sure being brought to trial, but definitely safeguards need to be in place for that, 100%. And it's probably something like, and this can't compare, but I'm bringing out this comparison. You know, like when you go to a hotel and it says, "Do not hang your hangers on the fire suppression system; it will go off." I mean, like some of these things, like you know, but in this case, it's a child who may not have had the proper guidance or education on how to use the technology effectively. And to me, I take that very seriously because I'm always teaching my kids about PII. I feel like I'm the only one on the block who teaches her kids PII. We were at the pool one time and a lady asked me, like, "How old is your daughter?" And my daughter snapped back. She goes, "Oh, I can't tell you that. That's PII." But yeah, not all kids are taught this kind of thing. And of course, the person thought it was rude and didn't know what they were talking about. But then I educated and they were like, "Oh, okay. Wow." But yeah, these are kind of things that I feel like should be spoke about more often because everyone is starting to use AI. You can't get through life without using it. It's like the internet. It's almost like something a requirement to be able to understand and navigate and typing. But I'm concerned that without the proper safeguards or guardrails in place, especially for younger children who have not fully developed their mind to be able to think for themselves, I think it could be very dangerous. Which is why I don't allow my kids to have like Instagram or other social media platforms yet, because I can just see through the influence of that and through other friends, it could be bad things unless they're properly taught.
This is fascinating. I'm a technologist, technophobe, which a lot of people who know me know. Like, I don't like my kids being on YouTube. I let them have any. Mine's still too young for social media, but I'm an avid hater of phones and devices in their hands at all times because I've got this inherent fear that people just have allowed too much technology in their life without really knowing what any of this means. And I've done quite a lot on stage before. I've social engineered people in the audience and got to like bank details or transferring air miles just from, as you said, people sharing PII so freely. Most Americans don't even know what PII stands for. So kudos for even being in the GDPR space full stop. Cool. Yeah, I think that was an interesting topic. Second one that I thought was interesting, and this will take some explaining before I can give you some relevance to it. But for those in the UK, our blessed NHS, National Health Service, got hit again by another cyber attack last week. And it made me think, though, that I've done a lot of pen testing in my time, as a lot of people have, and critical infrastructure owned by government, they protect our most sensitive data. In the US, you think about like Social Security, you think about parts of like the Obamacare systems, as a comparable thing, often have the worst security postures. Do we think that governments just don't understand security at all? Or is this a problem that we just have in the UK?
Okay, first can confirm. Secure governments do have the war security program because I work through the VA a lot through like healthcare and
Yeah.
everything like that. And it's every other day I'm getting a notice, hey, your social security number has probably been breached by this, and this. And it's mostly in healthcare. And I checked out an article associated with that, and I noticed that they mentioned having kind of BCM processes in place around business continuity. But you know
Yeah.
what? I'm concerned that that's the go-to now. When anything happens to any organization, they're always like, oh, we have our proper business continuity plans and policies in place. Okay, that's great that you have those in place. You're meeting those requirements that are set forth, but do you really test them effectively? Are you doing rotating
Mm,
scope testing? Are you testing for potential ransomware? Or are you just testing to make sure you can evacuate everyone from the building safely during a fire drill? Like, the, the testing you do is how you're going to react when things take place. It's just like in the military. If you're practicing for breaching, an unknown building, you have to practice that or you're going to end up, shooting your friend on accident.
mm,
Same situation here. Like if we're not doing rotating scope scenario planning effectively and we're just meeting those check the box compliance requirements saying, yes, I have a BC plan. Yes, I tested this. So you hit on a really important topic here for me because I love business continuity and I think it's the foundational of our information security program. I'm
yeah.
really, really close to ISO 22301, which is
Yeah.
that business continuity standard everyone knows about. But also there's a new enhanced added ISO standard that's come out just this past October. It's ISO 22336, which talks about more organizational resiliency, which will align with the DORA Act regulations coming out of the
That's
UK as
interesting.
well.
Yeah.
So to me, it's basically to be able to protect your organization effectively, you need to look at those ISO standards. You need to look at the new evolving regulations and look at the FFIEC because the FFIEC is how financial services are governed. And if you're aligning your BC program against that regulation, then you're also going to be aligning it with NIST standards. To me, I'm like, I'm not just going to like, oh, we have a BC plan. No, that's not good enough for me because now you're turning around patients. You're not allowing the care you need. You're not servicing them, not giving them life-altering, operations they may need. And you're just saying, sorry, we'll reschedule you. That's not good enough. Like,
Well,
no.
yeah, I was involved in the remediation work for WannaCry years ago, which you may remember was hit the NHS pretty hard, and like most of the MRI scanners and various medical devices are all showing a blue screen of death. So yeah, you actually endanger human life at that point, which is interesting. I think the BCPDR conversation is fascinating. I wish we had more time to go into that because I think that a lot of them are tabletop exercises, which is in reality. I've walked into a lot of companies and gone before. They're like, oh, we can restore full prod in 40 minutes. I'm like, well, that's great. Like, have you actually crashed it to check that? Like, and also you can do it, but what happens if you leave tomorrow for someone else to do it? The other thing I think is interesting is like getting people to understand what happens if someone's not there. I was talking about how I'd been in an incident before when my CEO wasn't available. He was on a plane. So until he landed, we had to have done most of the stuff that he should have been involved in. And shout out to, there's a guy called Derek at Lucid Chart who is well into Dungeons and Dragons, and he completely gamified instant response to the thought you have like an assigned character, and there's like dice like you're in Dungeons and Dragons, and like you get given someone else's role, and then you have to follow what happens and roll. It's genius. But that kind of stuff makes this stuff accessible and more real. But I'm going to completely pivot into a whole different topic. You talked about being a leader in the military. I've talked to a few military people on this podcast already. Is it harder to be a leader as a woman in the military?
Yes, I'm just going to go out and say yes. It is. It was probably the most hardest job I've ever had because in the units of which I operated in, they were male dominated. 100%. There may have been one or two other females in my platoon, but they're like lower listed in females. They're trying to figure out where they fit in as well. Me coming in as kind of that platoon leader and company leader over time, yes, I noticed a lot of that. It's also hard coming in because when you come in as an officer, I feel like they brainwash you a little bit at OCS. They have to, like, hey, you're a leader. Everyone should respect you, blah, blah, blah. Drink the Kool-Aid. Be amazing when you leave. But then when you get to your actual duty station, like nobody cares who you are. They don't care that you're coming in. They don't care that you're the OIC because they've done things the way they've done it forever. And if you come in and try to change it, especially as a female, like that never flies. It never goes well. So yeah, it was very difficult navigating that. As a female in the military, even though you're an officer and are giving briefings and things like that, your opinions are often ignored, your insights are ignored, your solutions are ignored. It's just a very male-dominated kind of area.
Does it change when you're a CISO? Have you found it any different in civil life as a leader or not?
Well, I do more GRC, but yeah, it's still there. Like it's still there because I work in still a very male dominated industry.
Yeah.
Security, there's not a lot of female leaders, and there's not a lot of female leaders who do a lot of public speaking either. Maybe they're not comfortable with it for whatever reason. When I go to these industry conferences and present, I'm like one out of maybe 10 total of maybe 50 speakers, who are presenting. It's not common to see female speakers.
Why? Why are there not more women in our industry? Why is that? Like leadership and speaking, why are there not more women?
You know what? I don't know. Maybe it goes back to I don't know, the psychology of what I love about it is maybe it goes back to their childhood. Maybe they were taught to act a certain way or present themselves a certain way or to never be wrong. Yes, females are being held to a higher standard, I think, than males because you don't have the ability to be wrong and to make mistakes because those get called out more effectively. Because as a female, you're supposed to pay attention to detail and not miss anything. And if you miss something, you get called out for it. So yeah, I think it goes to how we've raised young girls in the past. And to my detriment, I've raised my girls to be very opinionated. They constantly are telling me they're not going to unload the dishwasher because they don't feel like it or they don't want to. So now I've created my own little mini demons to put out into the world.
Well, at least you're having to suffer from it too, right? You on a LinkedIn chat we were having separately, you said, and you just mentioned it again, that you can make less mistakes as a woman. Why? Tell me about that. Tell me about why you think that and how you think that.
So in the profession that I've been working in, like in the military and in InfoSec, I feel like to be successful in your role as a female, you have to be at least 2 or 3 times more attention to detail than male counterparts. So when you're out there presenting at a meeting or a conference, if there's a misstep by someone, it usually goes unnoticed. Or maybe in a meeting, someone will say, oh, well, let me just add to that, not pointing out that they misspoke. They're just adding to what they said to clarify. When I was in previous meetings at financial service institutions, they were like, no, that's not right. Here's what you mean. I was not corrected with the class that I felt like a lot of my male counterparts were corrected in the moment.
It's an observation.
So,
do you think, I'm trying to think how to phrase this properly. So like, I think tech belongs to a more liberal and quote unquote woke part of society, full stop. And we both work in tech companies. Do you think that therefore we're more progressive in certain parts of the industry than we are in others, or is this a systemic problem?
No, I think we're more progressive in some industries than the other, definitely. So for example, like HR industry, it's mostly female dominated. A lot of females work in HR. Same thing for teachers. A lot of females are teachers. But then when you get into more of the STEM areas, that's where it's still very heavily male dominated. And why that is, I'm not sure. Do
you think cyber is STEM or not? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think cyber is STEM or not? I think it's an interesting area because I always think I'm never quite sure if what we do is actually logical problem solving and almost like project and people management, or if it really is a quote unquote science subject.
I think it's almost a combination of both. Because, you have to have, those really great people management skills, but also have to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And then being able to inspire those around you to also follow suit. So I think it's a little bit of both, which makes it harder because you have to have the right skill set to lead in this kind of area. Yeah,
I agree. If you don't mind me saying, you were obviously quite a young mum. Do you think that helped or hindered you? Did it help you learn lessons? Is your career, was it harder to do things? Like, talk me through that part.
You know what? I think it helped a lot. At the beginning of my career, I was told, hey, you shouldn't work longer hours. You should go home and hang out with your kids or do whatever. And that internally pissed me off, because I know that I was taking care of my kids and I know I can do an excellent job at what I want to pursue as well. Just because I'm a mom doesn't mean that that's my only definitions. It's all who I am. I do not wrap my identity up into that. And I see a lot of females do that, which is a little unfortunate. And as I progressed my career, I actually started to feel bad about that and hid the fact that I had kids for a while, because I was worried that if someone knew I had kids, maybe they wouldn't hire me. Maybe they think I'd need to take sick time away, all of these things. Until recently, now I'm more open about it because, at the end of the day, I don't care. I'm going to do a great job. But I also have kids, just like my male counterparts. They have kids too.
Do you think men get an easier ride as dads? Because I often think that like the expectation is that as a woman, you should be caring for your kids as well as working. Whereas a man, it's okay because my wife is caring for my children. Like, do you think that society, even in this 2024, has still not realized that we both have joint 50-50 responsibility for our kids and our careers are equally important to each of us as well?
So yeah, I think it depends like on the families too, like how you operate as a family. So
Yeah.
me personally, my family, my husband did 20 years in the military and he's retired now. And now he's a stay-at-home dad. What
He's
does that
living
mean for
my
me?
dream, by the way.
Right. But what does that mean for me? It means I can easily work 12 to 15
Yeah.
hour days. But then I feel bad because I'm not hanging out with my kids. So we have a little bit more of that reversed kind of standard role in our house.
Yeah.
And I guess it just depends on what you grow up with, what your partner's comfortable with. But I think we could do a lot of society to help females, especially those who want to progress in very high demanding careers, get where they need to be. Because don't even get me started on childcare, because that is not affordable ever anywhere.
I agree. So my wife's a stay-at-home mum because I travel so much that it made it almost impossible for her to work. She was a teacher, well, still is a teacher when she has time to do like supply teaching. But we looked, and when she was working, she would have actually have lost money in childcare costs versus earnings. It was literally like it would have been financially detrimental, which I agree. It's fundamentally broken. But I also think, maybe this is me saying a different stance as well, that we also shouldn't be encouraging that everyone should work at times. Like we take this societal view where we're now in the UK, particularly, I think the US is different. We're trying to encourage from a financial and political stance that, well, every parent should work regardless of like kids or stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, you have a husband at home, I have a wife at home. And I think, well, actually, we talk about the generation for tomorrow, and you talked about gender bias and stuff that we've taught and raised our kids in. If we don't have present parenting, I think we're equally responsible for potentially propagating continuing trends that we don't want to see in the future, but we're not doing enough to stop them. I don't know if that's me on a soapbox, you disagree, but
No, I completely agree. It's trying to find that right balance between getting where you want to be professionally in your career, if that's what you choose to do, while also balancing, your need to be there for your kids and take care of them and make sure they're nurtured to have that really positive outlook on life. So look, being a parent is the hardest job I think I've ever done. Even
agree.
I would probably deploy again before even considering starting over with kids. Like, there's no way.
I think saying no to my 6-year-old daughter Isabel is far harder than saying no to my CEO by a mile, by an absolute mile. So we talked about gender diversity. If you don't mind me going there, and feel free to say no, but you talked about having a son who's on the autistic spectrum and therefore is part of neurodiversity. How do you find, has that helped you as a person, as a leader, as a thinker? What's the effect of that on you?
Yeah, so it was really difficult when he's first diagnosed when he was 2. We couldn't figure out why he's verbal, he speaks, but then he'll go a long time without speaking. So he ends up having select mutism. He'll choose not to speak and just point and grunt. And we couldn't figure out like what's going on with him. So we had him tested and everything. He was diagnosed. So then we ended up kind of working with specialists and therapists. None of that worked. That just, pissed him off because they tried to make him speak and do things he didn't want to do. But kind of that took me to kind of get to know my son a little bit more. I spent more time with him. I started understanding kind of his own language and how he wanted to communicate with me. And I'm pulling that into with how I manage teams as well, because not everyone on my team communicates the same way. Maybe some people are more direct. Maybe some people are not. So it's really taken me a step back to really get to know the individual, how they want to communicate, and how I can best communicate with them. So yeah, I found that it's helped a lot. And also understanding the psychology of why our brains think a certain way. I find that extremely fascinating. Because I mean, you can't figure that out for everybody, but it's really neat to see. For example, there was this electric company, right? They were coming to my house to rewire the fireplace that my husband's building. So they had to come and rewire it. But then they sent an email that said, hey, here's a picture of the person who's coming. Here's their name. Here's what they're going to drive. And here's the license plate. And this is what time they're going to show up. And when my husband told me that, my mind went to, oh my gosh, what did this company do to have to implement this many controls? What happened?
Yeah, I see where you're going, yeah.
And he was like, why would you think that? I thought it was really great. It gives people a sense of security and everything. And I'm like, no, I'm like, what did they do? How did they mess up? Like, so it's interesting to see how our viewpoints just went completely opposite directions on that. I still don't know what that company did. I should research it. There's got to be something. But
it's interesting though, isn't it? It's different ways of thinking. I talked before about not letting my kids on YouTube, and one of the reasons was that like I get lots of parents and friends of ours that go, "Oh, they're on YouTube Kids, it's fine," and I'm like, "Give me 15 seconds. There's pornography on YouTube Kids." Like,
yeah.
and people just because our brains have been wired to function in like trying to find the dark and the gray areas of things. That's how we think. I was saying to you before we came on live that like I would love to see physiologically inside someone's brain what happens differently to mine versus yours when we see the same thing but come up with different answers. Why did we come up with different answers? Like it fascinates me. I think it's interesting when you talk about neurodiversity. I think that we as a society need to get better. The thing you said which really interests me is that I agree entirely. When we have neurodivergent people in our lives, we are forced to get to know them in a way we wouldn't get to know other people. We give them more time, we give them more effort. We want to try and understand their nuances, their intricacies, and how they work so we can interact more efficiently. And I often think that the lesson I've taken from those relationships in my life is that we need to actually try and apply that time and effort to everyone we meet, because that's where I take from it. Where you have to put in more effort, you do, but then you just rely on everyone else just giving you like kind of a surface level thing. Let me ask you a couple of really direct questions before we close. Do you think women make better leaders than men?
Well, I'm a little biased because I am a female, so yes.
Why?
But I don't. You know what? I think females are more in tune with soft skills, and I think they're more emotionally kind of connected with individuals. They can kind of almost immediately identify if someone's up to no good or not. We have this kind of intuition about us that's really unique. I've noticed this in my parenting and in my time in the military too, because you can just meet someone and in 10 minutes you basically know, like, is this person a good person? Do I want my kids hanging out with this person? Ask your wife about that. Like,
no, I'm laughing because she is an incredible judge of character and I'm a terrible judge of character. So I'm laughing because I'm resonate with everything you said.
Yeah. I mean, you just know pretty quickly, like, is this going to be a good influence on my children? Is this good influence on me? Is this going to be a right fit for my team? All of these things come into play. And I think we just hone in on more body language and reading what's not actually being said, better understanding what's not being said to more effectively make those, decisions at the end of the day. Now, I don't know. Again, I'm biased because I am a female. So
no, I agree. So in various capacities, and ironically, some of them are in places where you talked about there's more diversity, right? So I've worked with a lot of women leaders in HR, women leaders in marketing, and some of my favorite leaders and the most intelligent people I've worked with and the people I've learned the most from were women in leadership roles because they saw things in a way that I and male colleagues couldn't and didn't. And come with a different angle. I don't disagree with anything you're saying at all. I said it was intentionally pointed questions. I don't think there isn't the right answer to who. So I think it's individual, right? But I think it was interesting. It is another question that I think is maybe potentially controversial, but are we actually progressing in diversity, gender, sexuality, race, neuro, or are we just kind of saying we are? Like, do you feel like things in your career have actually changed? Civil and military combined, whatever.
I think I don't know if things are changing as fast as I would like them to change. I think it's more of a level of acceptance right now. And that's a little unfortunate with it being 2024, almost 2025. But I am happy that there's more of a level of acceptance of everyone, no matter their background, how they identify, anything like that. But I do want to see more kind of not just acceptance. I want that step further. I want to be able to, like, for instance, for my son, get the resources he needs, effective resources to support him without having to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to get those supportive resources. So, having more support in kind of our, psychology and mental health, those are all so important to me. And I'm a big advocate for that. It's just, we're not there today, at least not in the US. We're not there today as a society, unfortunately.
Acceptance was interesting. I think that you're right. I think we've got better at accepting the negatives. Like, we're okay with the shortcomings that come with a person of this type as we perceive them or see them. But we have not got to a point of embracing positives when we say, actually, this is why having diversity of this kind is beneficial, because they bring this skill set, this mindset, this attitude, which we don't have. I think you're right. I think it's about, like, we're okay with everyone being diverse, but we're not okay with actually working out what the differences and benefits of that diverse pool or complexity are. Interesting. If you could change one thing in the industry, what would you change?
Questionnaires, vendor questionnaires. I never want to see one of those again, ever. Like, please don't send me a questionnaire.
I've been filling in a fair share of those recently. I agree. We need to get to. I was at Wistic for a while, which is obviously in the vendor risk space, and I agree. We need to get to a place where we find something more sensible. This is a whole separate conversation, so I won't go into. I'm an advocate of true transparency. I've said this a lot on this podcast. I think we should just be sharing open S-bombs, pen test reports, warts and all, like, except for the red lines, except the red lights, and just live in a world where we can make relationships based on trust of reality, not based on you saying yes and here's the evidence in the report, which we know may or may not be true. Fine. Any closing thoughts before I fire one more question at you?
No, this has been really fun. I really enjoyed this. This is awesome. I can't wait to hear your next one too.
Okay, so we have a tradition, or I have a tradition of asking, and I stole this from Diary of a CEO. If anyone doesn't know, Stephen Bartlett is a fascinating British guy who interviews people over the world, worth checking out on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. But he has a tradition, which I've stolen, which is to ask the previous guest for a question that you will ask the next guest. It's completely out of context, and they have no idea who they're asking that question to. So the question, this came from Adam Aralani. Do you know Adam at all?
No.
Okay, so Adam is, if you watch the pod, Adam is equally a fascinating man, the only pacifist Marine you'll probably ever find. But his question was, what is the worst or most dangerous thing that's ever happened to you that you've almost immediately managed to laugh about as soon as it happened? Strange question, but he's an interesting guy.
That's an intense question. I think that's a strange one. So the strangest thing that's ever happened to me that made me want to, oh gosh. This really puts people on the spot.
That's the point.
Like that. You know what? I'm trying to think through my life in the past, couple of years to hone in on this. I honestly cannot think of anything. I am so boring. I know. I'm going to go with, here's one. Okay. So this was the worst thing that I think I've ever done to one of my kids. How about this?
Okay. Yeah, let's go with it.
Let's go here. Okay. So my daughter, when she was starting high school, so I was getting her ready, getting her to drop off, and everything. And then I ended up dropping her off at the middle school instead of the high school. And I didn't even realize she started a brand new school. I didn't even know I dropped her off at the wrong school. I didn't know until she came home later that day and told me I took her to the wrong school. That was so embarrassing.
Wait, how did she got to the right school? What did she do?
So they were across the street from each other.
Oh, okay.
I ended up just going to the wrong one on accident. To this day, she never lets me live that down. But she ended up taking care of it herself, which I was really impressed because she's very, very shy. So she ended up going into the middle school, finding an administrator, saying, I'm supposed to be in high school. I don't know what I'm doing here. My mom's insane. And they ended up helping her get across the street because it was like a big highway she had to cross, kind of to go across. And then she went all day. I was like, you had a phone. You could have called me. You could have texted me. I would have come to pick you up. But no, she stewed on that all day just so she could throw it in my face when she came home that evening.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. I have full respect for her in maintaining that for a moment of full impact. She did want to give you the chance to be able to get out of it while you were virtual. She wanted it face to face. I approve of that. Great, Megan, this has been interesting than I expected. I think you've got some fantastic views, and I think that it's worth everyone hearing how you and other people think. So thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. If anyone wants to reach out during or after this, then I'm sure you can find Megan pretty easy on LinkedIn with the name that's on the blurb at the front of this. Any questions for me, feel free to drop by, and Megan and I will ask you for a question for our next guest once this call is finished. So thank you, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you again soon.